Welcome to the patch 1.13 video review for Legends of Runeterra for this channel. But we're doing a bit more than just a patch review in this video today. The patch notes we got consisted of just a few card changes, but the more exciting thing we'll be talking about is a few cards that were leaked that are very likely to be added to the game in the next Legends of Runeterra event. As usual, there have been some expedition changes as well, but we won't be going over those. I'll just be looking at each card change from a rank point of view, then we'll be talking about these new cards that are all but confirmed by Riot from that same point of view. I'll have timestamps for every card in the video description and as a pinned comment below for anyone that wants to skip to specific cards. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Starting off with the card changes, the first being the only champion that's been changed, it's Lee Sin, who is now a 5 cost, up from a 4 cost, and has had his health increased by 1. The nerf that the team mentioned a few weeks back has revealed itself, and this new Lee Sin is very close to the buff I was pulling for originally, back when Lee Sin used to cost 6 mana during the Rising Tides meta. I mentioned that all he needed was a mana cost reduction of 1 with his original stat line of 3/6, and everything else remaining exactly the same. Now Lee is a 3/5 for 5 mana. A lot of people wanted a Lee Sin nerf in general, and part of me does think he was overbuffed initially, especially when you consider his champion spell change from the nearly unplayable Dragon's Rage to the very good Sonic Wave. Yet his level 2 still retains his Dragon's Rage-esque ability, which is still a little weird to me, but even with that, I personally thought Lee himself was fine. A lot of people thought he was insanely overpowered, but the problem wasn't Lee Sin so much as it being Targon as a whole, in my opinion. Targon is basically Ionia 2.0, and when you combine the two regions together, you're effectively doubling down on each region's similar strengths, and there aren't enough tools in the game to punish that region combination's weaknesses if you have the right champions. Lee Sin was just an amplifier to what was already an extremely powerful region combination for combo decks in general. I'll just make a prediction here and now. Since Call of the Mountain was a huge power creep for the game, at least in my opinion, if we get another combo focused champion in either Ionia or Targon in a future set, I think this issue is going to show up again, and we'll see another Ionia Targon combo deck that's just as OP, but with that new champion instead. Unless the next set absolutely invalidates Targon as a whole, but I just don't see that happening. Moving on to the only spell that was changed, it's Make It Rain, which now costs 3 mana, up from 2 mana. Quite a few people in the community were not surprised by this one, myself included. Riot did state in the last patch that Make It Rain was also being changed, and everyone I've seen talk about the game guessed that this would be moved to 3 mana, and it has. Bilgewater decks that weren't focused on burning the opponent out were already cutting this card, but this moving to 3 mana I think ensures that Make It Rain will never make it back into non-aggressive Bilgewater decks. I think the only decks that will run this are Noxus Bilgewater style decks, and maybe not even all of those. I could see Twisted Fate Swain decks not running this card anymore, oddly enough, since it's a slower, more control-oriented deck than, say, Pirate aggro. And TF Swain doesn't exactly struggle with dealing damage to level up Swain through its other cards. Now, let's move on to a few new cards that were leaked from the upcoming KDA event that we're getting to coincide with the League of Legends event, which should be up very soon, if not already by the time you see this video. There was some concern about these being fake, but the vast majority of people think these are real since it was confirmed previously that the next event was going to have new cards in it. A quick shout out to Cosmic for putting this graphic together with all of these cards. Be sure to check out his Twitch channel in the top right, and I'll leave a card with a link to his YouTube channel as well in the top right. So let's start off with Go Hard and Pack Your Bags. So Go Hard is a 1 mana slow spell that drains 1 from a unit and shuffle 2 copies of me into your deck. Once you've cast me 3 times, transform all copies of me everywhere into Pack Your Bags. Pack Your Bags is also a 1 mana slow spell that reads, deal 5 to all enemies and the enemy nexus. Transform all copies of me everywhere back to Go Hard. So this is going to compete with Vile Feast and Unspeakable Horror. I think Shadow Isles decks that are running both will need to cut one of them to run this card. 6 slots to dedicate to ping effects is already a lot. Control decks have been doing it mainly due to spell shield effects coming from Targon like Bastion, but they can barely afford to do it as is in my opinion. I just can't see them running 9 copies of cards that deal 1 damage. I do think this card is good, mainly due to shuffling additional copies into your deck every time you use one, which increases the probability of you drawing this 3 times and using it. This can mess up your draws too if you're looking for a specific card, but I still think it's good enough to be added to Shadow Isles control decks. Vile Feast will probably get cut for this, but we'll see. Next we have Go Get It. This is a 5 mana fast spell that reads, recall an ally to summon an exact ephemeral copy in its place. Reduce its cost to 0 this round. I think this card has the best art out of all of them, and I also think it's one of the best cards in this group, although none of them are bad. Hecarim decks get an additional tool to play with, and it makes Deathmark a bit more consistent for those fans of ephemeral midrange. Naturally, this has synergy with Kalista and Thresh too. The only thing that makes this card awkward is that recall effects are usually used defensively, but ephemeral units are best on turns when you're the attacker. They can be used to block, but they're not as good in that scenario. So the effects kind of clash with each other in that respect. Obviously it works out if your opponent tries to use a removal spell on your unit on your attack turn when you haven't attacked yet, but that doesn't come up all the time. Only specific decks are going to want this, mainly ones with the champions I mentioned. Next we have Out of the Way. This is a 5 mana slow spell that reads, for the rest of the game, allied buffs, except barrier, are permanent. Draw 1. I'm going to assume that this card essentially turns give effects, which only last until the end of the round, into grant effects which are permanent, with the exception of barrier. This doesn't mean spell shield is permanent and that you can't remove it anymore, since it's kind of a permanent ability already until it negates something. This is a solid card for Targon, but the only way Targon is truly going to make full use of this is in a unit focused deck that isn't bent on aggression like Nightfall decks usually are. And we haven't really had those yet. Champions like Leona haven't found a home in a mid-range strategy yet. Usually she's relegated to stalling for Aurelion's Soul. Taric hasn't found his footing yet. Even the revamped Vi Heimerdinger deck that uses Targon cards instead of Ionia can't truly take advantage of this card in my opinion. There is one potential deck I could see this in, and I don't want to say too much on it for now since it's largely untested. But I will say it possibly involves Taric and another champion that is not in Targon. Next we have Give It All. This is an 8 mana slow spell that raises all allies' power and health to the highest power or health among allies. Grant all allies allied keywords. Now this card I could definitely see Vi Heimerdinger decks playing. It has the potential to be a mainstay in that deck. It makes your turrets a lot sturdier late game and gives you an 8/8 T-Hex if you have Heimer out already when you play this. For anyone even thinking about sneaking this into discard aggro decks though, I wouldn't bother. The deck usually doesn't even have a board by the time you could play this anyway. Of course, Heimer decks are also prone to the same problem because the turrets are so frail initially. And this costs 8 mana and is slow speed, which is a lot. It's basically Piltover and Zaun's version of Mind Meld, except the stat buff is permanent at the cost of this being even more expensive. I don't personally think Mind Meld is that bad, but it's not a great card either. At best, Mind Meld is a little underrated, so this might end up being that as well. And finally, we have Feel the Rush. This is a 12 mana slow spell that reads, summon 2 different random champions from your hand and deck. Raise their stats up to 10/10. I think if the meta remains slow, like it has been the past several months, this will be pretty good. I realize I might be in the minority saying that the meta is slow, but we've only had 2 aggro decks that are actually meta since the Noxus nerfs about 3 months ago now. One is pretty good, but the other is fundamentally terrible and won't survive a meta shift. Nearly all of the rest of the decks have either been control decks or combo decks, and quite a few expensive spells get played between the two. But anyway, this is the War Mother's call for Aurelion Sol ramp decks to use, and might replace Revitalizing Roar in that deck for lists that still run it. I don't think this is really worth running in other decks, however. I've heard Frosty Ezreal as an idea, and while I could see it work, I'm a little more skeptical of that one. And we're done. If you guys made it to the end, thank you so much for the support. If you enjoyed the video, let me know by hitting the like button below and leaving a comment. If you don't want to miss future videos, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click the notification bell below to guarantee that you never miss any videos from me. Also, feel free to check me out at the other social media outlets I hang out at in the description box below. You'll find my Twitter as well as my Twitch channel, where you can catch me live streaming again soon. Thanks again for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.